5 razor-sharp teeth clamped down on her wrist, not her skin, her sleeve. But at that distance, with a royal cub the size of a full-grown timber wolf lunging at her arm, nobody in the observation gallery could tell the difference. The gallery erupted. A guard captain bellowed into a horn for reinforcements. 2 elders stumbled backward, so violently they knocked over a wooden bench. A court physician clutched her chest and screamed for the arena gates to be opened. But the girl in the arena did not scream. She did not flinch, she did not pull away. She tugged back, and she smiled. Let me tell you how an orphaned Omega with no rank, no family, and no standing ended up on the floor of the most dangerous training pit in the Northern Territories, playing tug-of-war with the Alpha King's deadliest offspring. And let me tell you what happened when the king himself watched it unfold. 3 days earlier, the refugee column from the River Moon Pack had arrived at the iron gates of Shadowrest Fortress looking like the war itself had chewed them up and spit them out. 47 survivors. That was all that remained of a pack that had once numbered over 300. Rogue wolves had descended on River Moon territory in the dead of night, burning homes, slaughtering defenders, scattering families into the wilderness. The survivors had walked for 11 days through frozen mountain passes to reach the only alpha powerful enough to protect them. Alpha King Cedric Ashford, ruler of Shadowrest, warden of the Northern Territories, the most dominant wolf on the continent and by most accounts, the most dangerous. He had granted the refugees provisional sanctuary because turning away starving wolves in winter would have been a political disaster. But sanctuary was not acceptance. The River Moon wolves were guests, not pack members. They had no rights, no standing, no voice in the council. They ate in a separate hall. They slept in the outer barracks. They were tolerated the way you tolerate a stray dog that followed you home, fed but not welcomed, sheltered but not trusted. And Lena Whitmore was the lowest among them. 24 years old, Omega orphaned in the rogue attack that had destroyed her pack. She had no family left, no mate, no children of her own. What she had was 11 years of experience in the River Moon nursery, where she had raised every pup born to the pack since she was 13. She was small, barely 5'3", with auburn hair she kept tied back in a practical knot, a scattering of freckles across her nose, and gray-green eyes that most people never noticed because most people never looked at her face. Omegas were not meant to be looked at. They were meant to be useful, quiet, and invisible. Lena was extremely good at being invisible. She was also, as it turned out, the only person in Shadowrest Fortress willing to walk into an arena full of royal cubs that had already put 2 trained handlers in the healer's ward. The cubs were the talk of the fortress, 5 of them, born 3 months ago to King Cedric's late mate, who had died in childbirth. A tragedy that had sent shockwaves through every allied pack. Royal litters were rare. 5 cubs at once was unprecedented. And these 5 were already extraordinary. At 3 months old, each cub was the size of a full-grown timber wolf. Their teeth could shear through boiled leather. Their claws left gouges in stone. They were bundles of raw muscle, predatory instinct, and barely contained violence. And they answered to no one. The fortress had employed a rotating team of 6 handlers, all betas, all combat trained, all experienced with dominant wolves. In the past week alone, the cubs had injured 2 of them severely enough to require extended care. One handler had nearly lost her arm to the largest male cub. The other had been pinned and mauled so badly he could not walk without assistance. The remaining handlers refused to enter the arena without full leather armor and weighted restraint poles. The cubs responded to restraint poles the way any self-respecting predator responds to a challenge, with escalating aggression. It was by any reasonable assessment a disaster. And it was into this disaster that Lena Whitmore had walked 3 days after arriving at Shadowrest, stood before the captain of the King's Guard, and volunteered. Captain Brennan was a massive beta with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts found on various battlefields. Scars crisscrossed his jaw, his nose had been broken at least 3 times, and he was missing the tip of his left ear. He stared down at the small Omega woman standing in front of his desk and wondered if the mountain crossing had damaged her mind. "You want to enter the cub arena?" he repeated slowly. "Voluntarily, yes sir. The arena, where 2 trained handlers were hospitalized this week." "Yes sir. You are aware that you are an Omega. That those cubs are royal-blooded alphas with fully developed dominance instincts. That any one of them outweighs you by at least 40 pounds. "I am aware, sir." Brennan leaned back in his chair. His leather armor creaked. Why? Lena met his eyes, which was unusual for an Omega addressing a Beta captain because your handlers are treating them like threats. Dominant cubs do not respond to restraint. They respond to trust, and trust is built through play, not force. Brennan stared at her for a very long time. Then he sent a message to the king. The morning of the arena trial, 30 elders from the 12 most powerful allied packs gathered in the stone observation gallery that overlooked the training pit. The gallery had been built for watching combat exercises, not nursery demonstrations, and the elders filled it with the skeptical energy of powerful wolves who had been summoned to witness something they fully expected to be a waste of their time. Or a bloodbath. Several were privately hoping for a bloodbath. It would simplify the refugee question considerably. Elder Rothgar, the oldest and most influential voice on the council, stood at the front rail with his gnarled hands gripping the stone ledge. He was 83 years old, had survived 4 wars, and had the diplomatic warmth of a frozen river. This is reckless, he announced to no one in particular. Those cubs are heirs to the throne. Every one of them carries royal blood. And we are allowing a displaced Omega with no credentials and no standing to walk into their arena based on her claim that she is good with pups. Beside him, Dr. Elise Hargrove, the fortress medical officer and herself an Omega, clutched her satchel of healing supplies and said nothing. Her instincts were screaming at her. Every Omega sense she possessed was telling her that what was about to happen was dangerous, wrong, a disaster waiting to unfold. But she had examined Lena Whitmore during the refugee intake process and had noticed something unusual. The girl's fear responses were abnormally low. Not absent. Low. As if the part of her that was supposed to panic in the presence of dominant wolves had been rewired to do something else entirely. What that something else was, Dr. Hargrove could not determine. But it made her curious enough to hold her tongue. Below, the arena gates opened. Lena walked in. She wore simple clothes, no armor, no restraint poles, no weapons. Just a rough spun tunic, leather breeches, boots, and an equipment harness around her waist that held a length of rope, and nothing else. Her auburn hair was tied back. Her hands were empty and open at her sides. The cubs noticed her immediately. They were scattered around the arena. 4 of the 5 occupied elevated stone platforms, their usual positions, strategic high ground from which they could observe and ambush anything that entered their territory. The 5th, the smallest of the litter, a mottled gray and silver cub that King Cedric had named Cinder, was lying alone in the far corner, separated from his siblings. The runt 10 pairs of eyes locked onto the Omega walking across their floor. In the gallery, the room went silent. She is going to die, someone whispered. Lena knelt, not in submission. She did not bare her throat or flatten herself to the ground, the way protocol demanded. When an Omega entered the presence of dominant wolves, she simply lowered herself to one knee, bringing her body closer to the cub's eye level, and extended her right hand. Palm up, fingers relaxed. Then she waited. Nothing happened for 10 seconds. 20, 30. The silence in the gallery pressed down like a physical weight. Rothgar's knuckles whitened on the stone rail. Dr. Hargrove's hand crept toward her medical satchel. Captain Brennan's fingers hovered over the signal horn that would send armed guards pouring into the arena. The largest cub, a dark-furred male, nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, dropped from his platform and padded toward Lena. His lips were pulled back. A low continuous growl vibrated from his chest, the warning sound of a predator deciding whether something was food. Lena did not move. Her hands stayed extended. Her breathing stayed even. Her eyes, fixed calmly on the approaching cub, showed no fear. The cub circled her once, twice, 3 times. His growl deepened. He snapped his jaws inches from her outstretched fingers, a test bite, seeing if she would flinch. She did not flinch. The cub completed a 4th circle, then sat down 2 feet away from her, and stared confused by this strange creature that smelled of calm when it should have smelled of terror. From the far corner, Cinder raised his head. The small cub had been watching the entire encounter. Now slowly, cautiously, he unfolded his legs and crept forward. One massive paw at a time. His gray-green eyes, so similar in color to Lena's own, were locked on her outstretched hand. He reached her fingers, his wet nose pressed against her skin, cold and curious. He inhaled her scent. Then, in a movement so fast it was almost invisible, He lunged forward and clamped his jaws around her sleeve. The gallery exploded. Captain Brennan seized the signal horn. 2 elders shouted for the gates to be opened. Dr. Hargrove surged forward with bandages already in her hands. Hrothgar bellowed something about criminal negligence and refugee expulsion. And then a voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk weight. Every head turned. Alpha King Cedric Ashford stood at the back of the gallery. No one had heard him enter. No one had sensed him arrive. He was simply there. The way a storm is suddenly there, when you look up and realize the sky has changed. 6.5 feet of coiled authority. With black hair streaked silver at the temples. A jaw carved from granite and eyes that shifted between deep brown and molten gold depending on how close his wolf was to the surface. Right now, they were pure gold, focused with absolute intensity on the arena below. Let her work, he said quietly. Your Majesty, Captain Brennan started. I said let her work. There was no volume in the command. There did not need to be. Alpha authority rolled through the words like distant thunder, pressing against every wolf in the gallery, compressing arguments back into throats before they could be spoken. Stand down. Brennan's hand dropped from the horn. The elders went still. Dr. Hargrove clutched her bandages and held her breath. Every eye returned to the arena. Cinder had Lena's sleeve clamped firmly in his jaws. His needle-sharp teeth had shredded the fabric. His puppy growl rumbled through the arena, fierce and proud, the sound of a young predator who had caught his prey and intended to keep it. Lena looked down at the cub attached to her arm, and she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a placating smile. A real one, warm and delighted and slightly mischievous, the way you smile at a child who has done something simultaneously outrageous and adorable. Then she tugged back. Not hard. Not aggressively. A steady playful pull that said, You have got hold of me, little one. Now what are you going to do about it? Cinder's eyes went wide. His tail, which had been tucked against his body, began to wag. He braced his paws against the stone floor and pulled harder, growling with increased enthusiasm. Lena laughed. The sound echoed through the arena and floated up through the gallery, and it was so genuine, so full of uncomplicated joy, that several wolves felt something loosen in their chests without understanding why. She let the cub drag her forward a few inches, then braced and pulled back, letting him feel her resistance without overwhelming him. It was a game, a negotiation conducted entirely through tension and release, through the ancient language of play that every young predator instinctively understood. Cinder yanked. Lena held firm. Cinder shook his head vigorously. Lena pretended to lose her balance, stumbling sideways with exaggerated clumsiness. Cinder pounced on the perceived advantage, tugging with all his strength, his small body vibrating with excitement. One by one, the other cubs abandoned their platforms. The dark male who had circled her earlier approached first, drawn by the commotion. He watched for a moment, head tilted, then grabbed the trailing end of Lena's equipment harness and pulled in the opposite direction. Lena was now being tugged in 2 directions at once, and she was laughing so hard she could barely keep her balance. The remaining 3 cubs joined within minutes. 5 royal heirs. Each one a weapon in training. Each one bred for dominance and aggression, were now engaged in an elaborate game of tug-of-war, with a 5'3" Omega who treated them like what they were. Children in the gallery. No one spoke. Impossible, Captain Brennan breathed. Those cubs hospitalized 2 armored handlers, professional handlers, and this girl is playing with them in a cotton tunic. Hrothgar said nothing. His mouth was open slightly. His grip on the rail had loosened. Dr. Hargrove was crying. She did not appear to notice. At the back of the gallery, Cedric Ashford watched with an expression that his guards had never seen on his face. His jaw was no longer tight, his hands were no longer clenched, his eyes had shifted back from gold to brown, soft and warm, and they tracked every movement the Omega girl made with an intensity that had nothing to do with tactical assessment and everything to do with wonder. Look at how she moves, he said, almost to himself. She never exposes her throat. Never presents her belly. She maintains her boundaries, she holds her ground, but there is no fear in it, no challenge. She acknowledges their strength without submitting to it. He paused. She sees them, not as weapons, not as threats. She sees the children underneath. You sound impressed, Your Majesty, Hrothgar said carefully. Cedric did not answer. Below, Lena had shifted tactics. She retrieved a length of rope from her equipment harness and began dragging it across the arena floor in quick, unpredictable patterns. The effect was instantaneous. 5 cubs abandoned their hold on her clothing and gave chase, tumbling over each other in their eagerness to catch the darting rope. Their growls had changed pitch entirely. No longer threatening, joyful. The exuberant, unrestrained sounds of young predators learning to hunt through play. Lena guided them with subtle changes in speed and direction, letting each cub experience the thrill of almost catching the prize, rewarding their persistence with brief moments of success before whisking the rope away again. She was teaching them coordination, timing, the difference between aggression and enthusiasm, and she was doing it through laughter and movement and the simple, profound act of treating them like they mattered. 40 minutes later, the energy in the arena shifted. The cubs were tiring. Their pounces became slower, their growls softer. One by one, they began to settle. Cinder was the first to stop. He padded back to Lena, collapsed at her feet, and rolled onto his back, exposing his belly. The gallery went completely still. A dominant cub, voluntarily presenting his vulnerable underside to an omega. Lena knelt beside him and gently scratched the soft fur of his stomach. Cinder yawned, his massive jaws stretching wide, and closed his eyes with a sigh that seemed to release every ounce of tension from his small body. Within minutes, all 5 cubs were arranged around her in a loose pile. The dark male had his heavy head resting on her thigh. 2 of the females were curled against her back. The 4th cub was draped across her feet. And Cinder, the runt, the outcast, the cub who always slept alone while his siblings piled together for warmth, was curled in her lap with his teeth still gently holding a scrap of her shredded sleeve. Lena sat among them like a calm center in a storm of sleeping predators. Her smile had softened into something quiet and tender. She looked up toward the gallery, seemed to find a particular pair of eyes through the stone opening, and raised her hand in a small, almost shy wave. In the gallery, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories felt something crack open in his chest that he had believed was sealed forever. 2 hours later, Lena emerged from the arena. Her clothes were destroyed. Her tunic hung in strips. Cub fur covered every inch of her. She had a scratch on her forearm that was already scabbing over, likely from an overenthusiastic paw rather than any intentional aggression. She smelled like puppy breath and arena dust, and the particular warm musk of sleeping wolf cubs. She stepped into the corridor and found Cedric Ashford standing there, alone. No guards, no advisors, no elders. Just the king, leaning against the stone wall with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression she could not read. Your Majesty. Lena stopped short and bowed her head in the deep formal gesture that displaced pack members used when addressing the Alpha who had granted them refuge. The bow of someone who had nothing and was grateful for whatever crumbs of tolerance fell from the high table. I apologize for my appearance. I did not expect do not bow. His voice was rough, not the polished tone of a king addressing a subject. Something raw, more human, not after what you just did. Lena looked up, confused. I was only doing what the River Moon refugees were asked to do, proving we can integrate, demonstrating our usefulness to the pack. Cedric uncrossed his arms. He pushed away from the wall and stepped toward her, and despite his enormous size, despite the power that radiated from him like heat from a forge, there was nothing threatening in the movement. He approached her the way she had approached his cubs, slowly, deliberately, with respect for the space between them. You did not demonstrate usefulness, he said. You connected with my cubs in a way that 6 trained handlers could not. You walked into an arena that put 2 warriors in the healer's ward, without armor, without weapons, and you made 5 royal heirs feel safe enough to sleep in your presence. His voice caught on the last word, barely perceptible. But Lena heard it. That is not integration. That is something else entirely. They are easy to love, Lena said softly. They are just children. Your Majesty frightened, overwhelmed, missing their mother. They do not need handlers with restraint poles. They need someone who sees them. Something moved across Cedric's face. Something raw and unguarded that he clearly had not intended to show. Cinder, he said. The runt. His siblings push him aside. He sleeps alone. He eats last. I have watched him and I have not known what to do. The trainers say he needs to develop his dominance instincts or the others will never accept him. They say I should separate him. Train him harder. Force the aggression out. He stopped. His jaw worked. He is my son, and I did not know how to help him. Lena's chest ached. She forgot for a moment that she was an Omega addressing a king. She forgot the protocol and the power imbalance and the thousand reasons why she should measure her words carefully. She spoke from the place inside her that had raised dozens of pups and loved every single one of them. He does not need to be dominant, she said, and there was quiet steel beneath her gentle voice. He needs to be seen. He needs to know that being the smallest does not make him the least. She met Cedric's eyes directly. A boldness that would have scandalized the court. Strength is not only about size and aggression, Your Majesty. Sometimes the strongest thing in the world is gentleness. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust. Cedric stared at her. The corridor was silent except for the distant sounds of the fortress, and the muffled whimpers of cubs settling deeper into sleep behind the arena door. You are remarkable, he said quietly. Does anyone ever tell you that? I am an Omega who is good with pups. It is what Omegas do. Number, what you do is not what Omegas do. What you do is what you do. His hand rose, hovered near her face, then fell back to his side as if he had thought better of it. And I would like to ask you something that I have no right to ask. Lena waited. Stay, he said, not as a refugee proving her pack's worth. Not as a temporary handler. Stay in the fortress, work with my cubs. Teach them what you know. Live in the royal wing, close to the nursery where they can reach you when they need you. Lena's breath stopped. Your Majesty, the council would never. The council answers to me. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, but his eyes were asking. Not commanding. I am not ordering you. Lena, I am asking, will you stay? She looked at him. This towering alpha king who could crush stone with his bare hands, who commanded armies, who ruled territories so vast it took weeks to cross them. Standing in a corridor outside a cub arena. Asking a refugee Omega if she would please help him raise his children. Yes, she said. I will stay. Something broke open in Cedric's expression. Not a smile, not yet, but the place where a smile would grow. 3 months reshaped the world. Lena moved into quarters in the royal wing. A small but warm chamber with a real bed and a window overlooking the inner courtyard. Every morning before dawn, she woke to the sound of paws scratching at her door. 5 cubs who had decided, with the absolute certainty of young wolves, that she belonged to them. Cinder was her shadow. He followed her everywhere. Through the corridors, into the gardens, to the kitchens where the cooks pretended to be annoyed, but always had scraps waiting for him. At night, he slept curled against her legs, his head on her knee, his teeth loosely holding the hem of her blanket, the way he had held her sleeve that first day. The other cubs thrived under her care. Their aggression mellowed into confidence. Their violence transformed into play. The handlers who had refused to enter the arena without armor began working alongside Lena, learning her methods. Watching how she redirected dominant energy into games and challenges and the simple profound reassurance of physical affection. But it was not only the cubs who sought her out. Cedric found excuses to be wherever she was. He appeared at the nursery to check on the cubs' progress. He invited her to walk in the fortress gardens after the evening meal, where their conversations about cub development gradually expanded into discussions of pack politics, territorial disputes, history, philosophy, and eventually the kind of quiet, honest exchange that happens between 2 people who are slowly, carefully learning to trust each other. He told her about his late mate, a strong alpha female who had died bringing his cubs into the world. He told her about the guilt he carried, that he had not been able to save her, that his cubs would grow up without their mother, that he had poured himself into kingship because it was easier than grieving. He told her things he had never told his advisors, his guards, his council. Things a king was not supposed to say out loud. And Lena listened. She did not offer platitudes or empty comfort. She listened the way she did everything, with her whole self, fully present, fully attentive. And when she spoke, she told him the truth even when the truth was difficult. The court noticed, of course they noticed. The Alpha King is keeping the Omega close. The whispers went, hissing through corridors and council chambers like wind through cracks in stone. A displaced refugee girl with no pack, no family. She has his cubs wrapped around her fingers and the king wrapped around hers. It is unseemly. It is inappropriate. It is dangerous. Lena heard the whispers. She smelled the disapproval, sharp and acidic, that clung to certain elders when they passed her in the halls. She felt the weight of suspicious stares from wolves who believed a refugee Omega had no business catching their king's eye. She tried to create distance. She shortened their walks. She declined dinner invitations. She kept her conversations with Cedric focused on the cubs and nothing else. It lasted 9 days before Cedric cornered her in the library. She tried to corner her in the library. You are avoiding me, he said. It was not a question. I am being appropriate, your majesty. You are being afraid. His voice was blunt, and not of me, of them, the court. The whispers. Lena stared at the book in her hands, the words blurred. They are right to question this. I am an Omega, a refugee. I have no standing, no rank, no name that carries weight, and you are a man, Cedric said quietly. Standing in front of a woman he cannot stop thinking about, asking her to stop running. Lena closed her eyes. The court will never accept it. The court accepted 20 years of war. The court accepted policies that displaced entire packs. The court accepted handlers beating my cubs with restraint poles because they did not know a better way. He stepped closer. The court's judgment is not infallible. And their acceptance is not required for me to know what I see when I look at you. What do you see? Lena whispered. Cedric was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused. The hand of a warrior who had become a king. He held her hand with extraordinary care, as if he understood that this small gesture, freely given and freely received, was more significant than any treaty he had ever signed. I see the woman who walked into an arena full of predators and smiled. He said, I see someone who treats monsters like children and makes them believe her. I see the only person in this fortress who tells me the truth without calculating what she might gain from it. His thumb traced across her scarred knuckles. And I see someone I have been falling in love with for 3 months and have been too much of a coward to say so. The library was very quiet. Firelight moved on the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a cub howled in its sleep. You cannot love me, Lena said. Her voice shook. I am if you say just an Omega. Cedric interrupted gently. I will remind you that just an Omega walked into a death trap, smiled at it, and turned it into a playground. That just an Omega taught 5 royal heirs how to trust. That just an Omega made the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories feel something he believed had died forever. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. You are not just anything, Lena. You never were. A tear slid down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. The first full moon of spring arrived 3 weeks later, and with it, a tradition as old as the fortress itself. The Alpha King's moonlight run, when the ruler led his family through the ancient forest under silver light. Cedric invited Lena. Run with us, he said. Not as a handler, not as a servant. As family. They ran that night through cathedral trees and moonlit clearings, Cedric in his massive black and silver wolf form, 5 cubs tumbling and yipping around Lena's legs, and a dozen pack members who had chosen to join their king's unprecedented run alongside an Omega. Lena could not match their speed. Omegas were built for endurance, not the explosive sprinting of alphas. But they slowed for her. They circled back, they adjusted their pace to hers, not out of obligation, but out of something that looked very much like respect, when she finally collapsed, breathless and laughing. In a meadow flooded with moonlight. The cubs piled around her in a warm furry heap. Cinder claimed her lap immediately. The dark male rested his head on her ankle. Cedric shifted back to human form and knelt beside her, his eyes soft in the silver light. Thank you, he said. For what? For showing me what I was missing. For teaching me that strength is not only about dominance. That sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is play to laugh. To let go. He brushed a leaf from her hair, his fingers lingering. For making me feel something I thought I had buried forever. Cedric. Lena whispered. I am in love with you, he said. Simply without performance or pretense. I know it is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons the world would say this is wrong. But I love you, Lena Whitmore. And I need to know if there is any chance that you feel the same. Lena looked at this king who had given her everything. Safety when her world was destroyed. Purpose when she felt useless. A home when she had lost the only one she had ever known. A family, 5 wild, wonderful, sharp-toothed children who had claimed her heart completely. And she realized that she had been falling for him since the moment he had stood at the back of that gallery and said let her work. Since he had watched her with intensity and respect instead of suspicion and dismissal, since he had asked instead of commanded. I love you too, she said. His kiss was gentle despite his size. Reverent despite his power, and when they broke apart, Cinder had wedged himself firmly between them, demanding attention with the righteous indignation of a child who felt he was being ignored, jealous, Lena laughed, scratching behind his ears. He recognizes a good thing when he sees it, Cedric said, pulling both Lena and the cub into his arms. 6 months later, Lena woke to a familiar weight on her chest and the sound of soft snoring. She opened her eyes. Cinder was sprawled across her. Significantly larger now, but still absolutely convinced he was small enough to use her as a mattress. The other 4 cubs were draped across the massive bed in various positions of boneless contentment. One had somehow ended up perpendicular across the foot of the bed with her paws in the air. Beside Lena, Cedric lay with one arm draped across her waist. His face relaxed in sleep, the hard lines of kingship smoothed away. He looked younger when he slept, almost peaceful. The mating ceremony had taken place 1 month ago. It had been beautiful, a blend of ancient royal tradition and the simpler rituals of the River Moon Pack, honoring both what Lena had gained and what she had lost. Lord Stefan, the alpha of the nearest allied territory, had attended and had been seen dabbing his eyes during the vows, though he denied it fiercely afterward. Half the court had wept openly. The other half, including Elder Hrothgar, had grudgingly conceded that perhaps the displaced Omega was not an entirely catastrophic choice for their king, particularly after she had resolved a territorial dispute between 2 rival alpha families by the unconventional method of sitting both alphas down in the nursery and making them watch their children play together until they felt too foolish to keep fighting. "You are staring," Cedric murmured, eyes still closed, mouth curving. "You are beautiful when you sleep. I am terrifying when you sleep." Brennan says I still growl. Beautifully terrifying. He opened one eye. The cubs want breakfast. The cubs always want breakfast. But he was already sitting up, carefully shifting Cinder aside, despite the cub's theatrical groan of protest. "Come, you beast. Let us feed you before you devour your mother." Mother, the word still sent warmth flooding through Lena's chest every time she heard it. The cubs had started using it 2 months ago, naturally and without prompting, as if it had always been true and they were simply tired of waiting for the adults to catch up. Cedric had adopted it immediately and without hesitation, as they herded 5 ravenous cubs down the corridor toward the great hall. Cinder trotting at Lena's side with a scrap of her nightgown clenched triumphantly in his teeth. Lena thought about that morning in the arena. She thought about razor-sharp teeth closing on her sleeve. About the choice she had made in that frozen instant, not to scream, not to flee, not to submit, but to tug back. To smile, to see the frightened child behind the sharp teeth and choose connection over fear. That single moment had changed everything. It had given her a home. A family. A mate who saw her not as lesser, but as essential. A life she had never dared to imagine was possible for someone like her. And it had taught a kingdom. Something that no war or treaty or show of force could teach. That the most powerful response to aggression is not more aggression. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is be gentle. That an Omega who smiles and tugs back can accomplish what armored handlers with restraint poles never could. That sometimes the smallest wolf in the room is the one who changes everything. Cinder tugged at her nightgown, tail wagging furiously, eyes bright with mischief and love. Lena tugged back, and she smiled. If this story stayed with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. More stories like this one are coming, and you will not want to miss what happens next.